Coach Galel, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to be in Cancun, Mexico.
Yeah, that's right. That's where we are recording this podcast before our mastermind where Galel will be teaching some AI stuff. And today we're going to talk about AI, copywriting, how you can make more money with all the good stuff. But I think what we need to start with, Coach, is what the heck is copywriting and how can it make me, the small business owner, rich?
The simple explanation of what is copywriting, it's persuasion via the written word. So how do I get you to do something with words in writing?
I think that's so important because if somebody's like, well, I really don't care about copywriting right now. Listen, if you got a Tinder profile, if you write emails,
Big time.
If you write sermons as a pastor, it's copywriting.
Yes.
Everything, because copywriting, as Galel said, is taking, when you want to persuade your 3-year-old to brush their teeth, instead of saying, and now you got to put it in writing. Now they can't read, of course, but it's the same sort of thing. You're persuading somebody to do something. And whether that is persuading your brother-in-law to go to the Michigan game instead of going to the Duke game or whatever it is, right? Or persuading somebody to come over to your house for Christmas Eve instead of making you go to their house. You're persuading people all the time through every single thing that you write. And knowing copywriting, I mean, honestly, copywriting has helped me in getting my wife and, and meeting her and impressing her and convincing her with all these sorts of things. So listen, copywriting is a very powerful tool, and Galel is going to break it down today as to how it can be used in anybody's life, including, and most importantly for everybody listening, how you can make money with it. So what's the coolest use of copywriting that you've ever come across?
So for me, the coolest thing that I have seen copywriting do has been, and this sounds like hyperbole, but I'm going to explain what it means. It's generating money out of thin air. And let me explain. So over the years, I've had different e-commerce projects where I build up an email list of potential customers and stuff. And so I have been able, with the use of email and copywriting, to drive thousands of dollars in revenue in just a few days, which is you're in a bind, you get an unexpected tax bill and you send out an email, you can generate a bunch of money on an email. That is money out of thin air. Also, when, as I explained in the previous episode that we had been on here together, I had a big business failing back in the mortgage industry back in the mid 2000s. And so I needed to generate money. And being able to have that skill set of copywriting, I was able to then go to businesses and let them know, hey, I love what you sell. Would you, hire me to write your copy for you and improve it? Here's ways I can do it. So I would have actual copywriting contracts. I worked as a contract copywriter to feed my family. So it's again, that money out of thin air type concept.
Yeah, it's really fantastic. And so for me, being introverted by nature, being able to build an email list, not ever meet people, not have to go face to face with somebody, and send an email out to people I've never met, never will meet before, and convince them to go to a website that they've never been to before and buy something and send me money. It was mind blowing for me. But the coolest thing that I've ever heard copywriting allowed somebody to do, there's this guy named Gary Halbert who was a very famous copywriter. And in 1985, he spent, I think it was $100,000, which in 1985 was a lot of money, to buy a single full page ad in the LA Times. And in the LA Times, he wrote a personal ad, a full $100,000 personal ad to find a wife. And he was very successful with it. I think he got tens of thousands of responses. He got a lot of hate mail for it too, but he ended up being very happy with his response. And then I actually, when I wrote the Perfect Day Formula, most people don't know this, but it's actually a personal ad disguised as a book, because I write the vision chapter in there about the woman that I want to meet, which then allowed me to helped me go on to meet Michelle. So that the idea of copywriting is not just, you're gonna send a postcard out in the mail to a bunch of people to buy your stuff. No, it's persuading anybody to do anything, anywhere the written word can come about. So it's absolutely amazing, but it probably sounds super overwhelming to people.
It does. It can, because if you search copywriting on the internet or you look up copywriting books, it's just this pile of material. And the simplest way that I want people to look at it is you use the example of a Tinder profile. And so I have a lot of single friends. I've been married to my wonderful wife, Emily. Now August will be 20 years we'll have been married. And so we have a lot of single friends, and I'll say, let me see your dating profile. And I look at a dating profile and I'll say to the girls, I say, okay, am I your target audience? You know, like I'm 40, turn 41, you know, next week. Okay. Like, am I your target audience? Yeah, I want to find somebody in my age range. Okay. What you're telling me by this is that you're very needy and that you just want somebody to support you financially. Is that the vibe you're trying to, you know, pull people in? Like, no, not at all. I'm like, okay, then let's change up some of the language. Right. And so again, from the Tinder profile, there's little tweaks, little words you can use to evoke certain emotions in your target audience. And that's all copywriting is emotion and getting in the head of that consumer that you want to target.
Yes, it is entering the conversation in the prospect's mind. So every time you send an email, you know, if you're sending an email to your friend, not business related, but you're sending an email to your friend, you want to think, okay, what are their objections going to be to my proposal to play golf at 2:00 on Saturday afternoon instead of playing golf at 10:00 on Sunday morning? But I really want to play at 2 on Saturday, so I know what they're going to say. They're going to say this, this, and this, and so I have to say this, this, and this. And that's really great, but also that language, because to your audience, there's certain words that will just absolutely turn them off and make them upset if you have the wrong language and you haven't put yourself in their shoes. So that's really good. What was your first introduction to copywriting?
You were my first introduction to copywriting.
Okay.
So surprisingly, right? Like for me, I went to a one-day mastermind with you and Bedros, and you talked about high-income skills. And one of the skills that you really focused on was copywriting. And I went, copywriting. I got to learn a little bit more about this. And realized that was one of the major things that was one of my weaknesses, because I would write things the way that I thought things should be portrayed. So I thought, like, when I'm selling a service or a product, I should talk about all the great things about the product and service. But that's not how you want to sell things. You want to sell things where you are evoking certain emotion in the person that you are selling to, so that they believe your product or service is right for them. So I was talking all about myself. I needed to make it more about the consumer. That was a huge revelation for me. And that's when that got me started on the copywriting journey.
Yeah. So for people who are like still trying to wrap their head around copywriting, think about like one of the most interesting people that you know. And what's probably going to be an attribute of that interesting person? They can tell great stories, you know, verbally. And a great copywriter can tell great stories in the written word, because that catches your attention and that gets you emotionally involved in what the person is telling. And through the storytelling done in a copywriting format, you can then start to persuade somebody of your argument, of what you want them to do, get them emotionally involved in it so that they get really excited and then say, how can I, solve my problem here that you have understood, you've entered the conversation in my head. So just understand there's so many parallels between a person who is an interesting speaker and interesting copywriting and effective copywriting, because it's the same thing. It's just, instead of it being verbal and audio, it's just written down. It's very much like your favorite movies are essentially copywriting and then turned into actors speaking the lines through telling a story and persuading you to feel a certain way through the words that are said, in addition to obviously the music and the action. So who did you start to study seriously first when you got into copywriting?
So one of the names that you had mentioned that had been an influence on you was Dan Kennedy.
Yeah.
So, and Dan Kennedy, for those of you who are not in the world of marketing, is like the godfather of modern direct response copywriting. And for me, I wanted to learn direct response, which is getting action A, inserting your copy, getting the A, B, and C, right? That's direct response copywriting.
Well, slow down. I didn't really understand that. So A, B, and C.
Yeah. So you have A is the prospect.
Yeah.
There is U, B, that your copy, and C is the outcome that you want.
Okay.
So getting them to act. And Dan Kennedy is like the godfather of direct response. So I started studying Dan Kennedy, and then I found this kind of affinity towards email. And so Ben Settle is somebody who I've studied a lot of his. I'm one of his email player subscribers. And that kind of got me more into the mindset of kind of creating my own world, like indoctrination of the people that enter my world and speaking to them and writing personality-based emails, which is what you do. Anybody who's on your list sees that it's personality-based emails, because that to me felt the most authentic.
Yeah, and so a personality-based email is what?
It's where you are using your personality in the emails. You're speaking the way that you would speak in conversation, but getting them to act in a business manner, right?
Yeah.
So you are using your personality and injecting your stories into the marketing material that you're sending out to people.
So when I was a kid, I grew up in this little town, Stratford, Ontario, Canada. And I read the newspaper every day because, I lived on the farm. I had 3 TV stations, didn't really have much to do. And, after I got through the sports, I'd read the news section. And every Thursday, there was this guy who ran a music store. And the music store was actually called Music, of all things. And his ad was so weird because all he would do was say, hey, this week, Joe Bob came into the store and, this is going on and my kids are doing this. And I was like, but this is so weird. But I was like, every Thursday, that was like one of the first things that I went to in the newspaper. That is like a really good, this is before email, before the internet, but that was personality-based marketing, where all he was doing was making a connection with the readers of the newspaper. And then he would say, and it was like a PS, like, hey, come in, we have $300 off Pioneer speakers this week or something like that. And it worked for a long time because the guy had a great business. But that is just an example of the personality-based marketing that you would see in Toronto. There was a guy named Mel Lastman. He became the mayor of Toronto. He became so popular, he became the mayor of Toronto. But for a long time, he owned the furniture store called Bad Boy. Bad Boy Furniture, and it's like, who has lower prices? Nobody. But he was so entertaining that people were buying because they would go to the store because they wanted to buy from him more than they wanted to buy the furniture. I'm sure he did great deals too. But circling back to Dan Kennedy, if somebody watching this is a fan of Alex Hormozi, God bless Alex, but everything Alex talks about was talked about by Dan Kennedy.
Yes.
If you are a fan of Frank Kern, God bless Frank Kern, but Frank Kern, everything he has publicly admitted he rips off Dan Kennedy. Everything comes from Dan Kennedy. Now, Dan Kennedy, everything that he does he has learned along the way from guys who invented direct response marketing over 150 years ago. So it's all students of stuff, but anybody you could possibly name, Russell Brunson, he was on our podcast like maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, and he said, everything I learned from Dan Kennedy. Ryan Dice, everything I learned from Dan Kennedy. Yannick Silver, who was my first mentor. Mark Ford, who I bought Early to Rise from, used to have Dan Kennedy write for Early to Rise back in the days. And the last thing I'll say about Dan Kennedy is that Dan Kennedy is also very good selling from stage speaker. And selling from stage and selling through copywriting are essentially the same thing, because he's memorized a script. So he's actually copywritten the script to sell, and then he just goes out and verbally delivers it. Whereas with a sales letter on the internet or a video sales letter, it's the same thing delivered in a different way. But Dan Kennedy, in the 90s, there used to be this thing called the Success Tour. And it was like, they had Ronald Reagan on it. They had, George Bush Sr. They had General Norman Schwarzkopf. They had football players. Donald Trump was even on the Success Tour. And what they would do is they would sell out stadiums of 20 or 30,000 people. And I don't think you can really pull that off these days. But Dan Kennedy had the worst speaking position. So it was all day long. And at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they would have the headline. That's when Ronald Reagan would go on, or George W. Bush, or George H.W. Bush, or whoever it was, would go on right before Dan Kennedy. And everybody who came to the event was kind of sold on the main person. And so all these people would start to get up. And Dan said his number one job of his presentation was to get people's attention and keep them in the seats. And so he would use lines like, "Oh man, the traffic's gonna be horrible out there right now." And he would, but he would also say, like, in this presentation, you're gonna learn this, that kept the people in the seats, because then he sold his magnetic marketing course at the end of it. And he had to become amazing at getting people's butts to stay in the seats. That was his first job of his presentation. It was not to get people excited, but to actually get people to stay. And so it just shows you, like, that's the thing that he was doing in his speech, getting people's attention, is the same thing that your email subject line has to do when in a cluttered inbox of 115 messages, your email subject line has to stand out. And that's where I see so many small business owners lose out, because they're sending out like Joe's newsletter, volume 8
Yeah.
is their subject line. And that's not going to have a very compelling open rate. So
same thing with social media posts. That's another one, Craig, is like the hooks in social media posts. Everybody's like wanting to use like YouTube and like people watching this now on YouTube or listening to it on podcasts. You have to have a compelling hook to get people's attention, and then you're competing with everything else that's out there to maintain their attention.
Yeah.
And that's one of the big challenges that I think people need to realize when they're working on this.
So when you were writing personality-based emails, what were some of the things that you use as like your checklist for success? Because I'm guessing, based on the feedback that I've had speaking with so many people, is that a lot of people watching our YouTube videos are small business owners who do have an email list that they don't email enough, but they do email. And if we can just break it down, it's like, here's some email copywriting best practices that are going to help you, double your email income this year or more. What are those things?
Keep it simple, first and foremost. What I find, having coached our clients inside of Early to Rise, is that the proclivity, where we're drawn to, is to complicate everything. Mm-hmm. Let's add more things to our life for discipline. You and Daniel talked about reducing the number of things that we do, right? In marketing, it's the same thing. It's doing less. So my simple checklist for an email, number one, begin with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey says in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So what is the purpose of my email? What do I want somebody to do? If it's an email, if it's a video sales letter, if it's a YouTube video, is it a podcast? What's the call to action that I want? That's number one.
What could those things be? I mean, because I'm like, okay, well, I want to sell them something. Yep. Is that the only thing, or is there other things?
There's multiple things that you can do when you are talking to a consumer. In some cases, it's, hey, watch my podcast episode, and here's why, right? But the call to action is watch this podcast video.
Okay, right. So when we do that all the time at Early to Rise, like we put all like, hey man, when in this podcast with Galel, you're going to learn, the number one thing that you should do in your emails. You're going to learn this 2 things not to do. You're going to learn this, and here's the link. Go watch this podcast right now if you want to grow your email income with copywriting.
Yep.
So that's a great.
That's it. Begin with the end in mind. So okay, it's what's my goal? If you're going to sell something, then you're going to have to make it a sales-focused email with a call to action, a singular call to action as to where they can go to buy the product or where they can go to book an appointment. One of the mistakes people make is that they want everybody to do everything at once.
Yeah.
So they want you to go watch this video, go buy this, and go follow us on Facebook and Instagram. You're giving people too many things to do. And as I tell people, confused people do nothing. So let's dumb it down, let's keep it simple, give them one call to action. And then once you've figured out the goal of that message, how are you going to get their attention? How are you going to get their attention so that when it comes into their inbox or swipes across their Instagram feed, that gets their attention, that stops what they're doing to create intrigue and get them to actually read what you have to say or watch what you have to say?
Yeah, so let's break this down into like a real world example.
Yep.
So let's say you're not even a business owner, but you're like, this is kind of interesting. And you want to have like a Halloween party and you want everybody to be there. And you're going to send email invitations. Now, don't be like my mom who sends emails to me with no subject line in there at all. Okay. So, I mean, I'll open them. Like she gets 100% open rate from me, 200% open rate because I read them twice. But you're not going to get a really great open rate if you don't have anything in the subject line. And then what you need to understand is that when you write that email, like when you're writing this email, this is exactly how I'd write an email in my business. I would write something that I'm going to write to a friend to catch their attention. Like, hey, are you doing this Saturday night? I'm like, what am I doing? What Saturday night? I gotta what are you talking about? I gotta open this email. And then your email should not include like 5-syllable words. It should not be hard to read. It should not be giant paragraphs. It should be very simple to read. And your business email should be very much like the email that you would send to a friend to invite them to your Halloween party and convince them to come to your Halloween party over every other Halloween party out there. So we've got their attention through the subject line. Is there anything that you've used as subject lines that you would recommend people use?
Yeah, I mean, use everything in your life, like crazy stories, weird things that happen, use those as subject lines. Like I used a subject line that is a big hit that was, my picture put a man in jail. And it was like, people were like, I have to hear about this. And it was basically a story of how I sent my wife a text in the evening. She looked at her phone and rear-ended a car with a police officer close by. And the guy ended up going to jail because he was drunk. So had I not texted my wife that picture, my wife wouldn't have rear-ended the guy and the guy wouldn't have ended up in jail. So my picture set this chain of reaction. And the whole premise of it was that, hey, the smallest things that you do can have huge consequences. And it was pushing people to listen to a podcast episode, right? Again, for me, I begin with the end in mind. So what do I want somebody to do? I want them to watch the podcast episode. What's a lesson or a story I can tell them that makes it make sense? And then the last thing that I do once I've written that is I will write the subject line. So I go kind of backwards to forwards.
Okay. Yeah, I actually usually write the subject line first. Like, how can I make this the most interesting, catchy thing? Like, even for my Instagram post is, why this 99.9-year-old is the world's most disciplined man. And, it did okay, but he wasn't 99, he was 99.9 years old as opposed to just 99. So it's using these words to get people's attention and get their curiosity. I think curiosity, when it comes down to
Big
copy, curiosity in your copy is very, very important. Promising people that they're going to learn something and using these techniques that grab their attention and stand out from so many other people. All right, so you get their attention, you write that email, you begin with the end in mind. Is there anything else in terms of like how long should the email be? Anything else that you would say in order to get people listening to this, to get them a fast start in copywriting?
One of the things that I see a lot of business owners make is they try to put too much information all at once. Use one sentence paragraphs. So if you see like a 3, 4, 5 sentence paragraph in an email, you have to think about what it looks like on a phone. And that's a lot of scrolling for somebody. And I know for somebody like me who's busy, if I see this block of text, I'm not gonna read through the whole thing. So again, simplicity is key. Say less, right? So I don't have a certain word count that I use, but it's basically like the look of it. If something's intriguing, I'll keep reading it if it's easy for me to read. So if the subject line's great, it tells a cool story, it keeps me intrigued, I'll keep reading all these single sentence paragraphs until I see what the heck it is that you want me to do. But if you give me this block of text, I'm not going to. So keep it simple with the way you format it.
Yeah, you got to think like email, the medium in which you are delivering it needs to be easy to read.
Has to.
Yeah, and I have some people who, whether they're coaching clients or some contractors and stuff, they send me blocks of paragraphs, and there must be like 150 words in the paragraph without a line break, and it's very difficult to read when I'm busy and I want to scroll through it. So keep it very simple.
Keep it simple.
Keep the words very short. This is actually a great time to recommend the Hemingway app, which
great app.
Yeah, and I don't actually use it, but
I use it.
Alex Hormozy recommends it, and it's simply, you want to write your content at a 5th grade level, maybe even less than that. I know when I started writing for Men's Health magazine, they said write at a 7th grade level, but obviously standards have gone down in the last 23 years.
It's true.
And it is true.
Yeah.
It is true. And so I'm sure that if I was writing for a magazine today, they would say write at a 3rd or 5th grade level. But this app, you can write your thing and then put it into the app, and it'll tell you what grade level you're at. Microsoft Word has something as well. It's called the Fleshman-Kincaid grade level.
Has a score it can give you.
Yeah, and so if it's grade 9 or above, it's way too advanced for somebody to read quickly, and because people are busy, they're not going to.
So don't use jargon, for example, like industry terms, right? So if you're, whatever your business is, you're a plumber, electrician, you're a florist, a photographer, don't talk about aperture when you're a photographer selling emails. I don't know what the hell that is. Instead, talk to me about like what makes for good lighting, what makes for the picture to look better, right? Aperture versus makes the picture look better. Right? Yeah. There's a difference in how you say those terms.
But on the flip side, you got to know your hot word buttons for your audience. Like if somebody is writing to Andrew Tate's type of audience, you have to use the word matrix. Like,
yes.
Like that's the catnip that you have to put in there for sure. So knowing your audience as well as you possibly can is the key, which is why I want to go into something that you do very, very well, which is you break down the customer avatars. Explain what a customer avatar is, why it's important, and how somebody builds one out so that it makes writing any emails or sales copy of any kind a whole lot easier and simpler.
So I got interested in psychology, and through learning psychology, I realized, wow, there's so much psychology in marketing. This is kind of this fun world that I get to live in. A customer avatar brings those together because a customer avatar is a profile of what your ideal client is, or an ideal client avatar, where you're basically writing a profile of who you want to buy your product or service. Everything from the physical features. This is a man who's 48 years old, who has 3 children, lives in Cancun, Mexico, and is an entrepreneur, makes X amount of dollars, and lives in this type of home. And then you get into the emotional characteristics. They're driven, they are family man, et cetera, et cetera. Then you get into the what keeps them up at night. And this is where, as a business owner, you have to think about your ideal customer, what is keeping them up at night, where you can then come in with your product or service and help that individual. So you have to know who you're speaking to and what their emotional hot buttons are in order to have success to target them with the written word or spoken word.
Yeah, this was the absolute most important thing that I did when I was in the fitness industry, because I had an exact customer avatar and I had all these details listed out about them. And because I had that, it made writing the emails so effective. And it was probably one of the smartest things that I ever did was having that and then just writing directly to that one individual.
Yeah.
And according to the story, when Tim Ferriss wrote 4 Hour Workweek, he was really struggling to write the book until he decided to write the entire book just to one friend. So he had this avatar in mind as he was writing out this book, and he said it made the writing process a lot easier. So keep that in mind. And the other thing is, if you have a very specific avatar, you might think, well, if I'm only writing to Bob, 48 years old, and blah blah blah, well then what about Carol, who's 53? Well, the cool thing is that even though you write specifically to an avatar, just like a bullseye has rings around it, percentage of people in the rings around it will still resonate with most of the copies. So don't worry, you're not going to alienate everybody by writing to that one best customer. And more importantly, you write to your best customer and attract more of them. So that's the very, very important thing to do.
And mindset plays into that too, Craig. If you have this scarcity mindset that if I only write to this one segment of the people, I'm not going to get business from other people. No. If you have a good message and a good product or service, I want you thinking about all the possibilities that exist out there. You're just talking about the voice that's here. So your mindset plays into that as well. Just knowing there's a lot of business to be captured out there.
Absolutely. And then the last thing that I want to talk about today, because I know we're going to dive deep into all of this stuff in our copywriting training coming up very soon, is the introduction of artificial intelligence. So now AI, ChatGPT, all this stuff, it can either overwhelm somebody or it can make somebody super excited because it can make the entire copywriting process a lot easier. So how do you use it, and what do you teach our coaching clients to do who aren't real copywriters, but to get the most out of it?
Yep. So first, let me talk about the mistakes I see, Craig, because there's people who are listening to this that probably do this, where they will say, ChatGPT, write me a blog post on this subject. Yeah, that's this number of paragraphs in length, enter. And then they just have this very mediocre piece of copy that spits out. AI is way better than this, because AI, it's as good as what you give it. So if you want to have quality outputs, you have to have quality inputs. And so what I do is I will tell all of our clients, right, is we'll go create a client avatar. And there is a step formula that we walk people through in our different trainings as to what creates a customer avatar. There's tons of places. You search online, hey, give me a client avatar profile and the questions I should ask. You can get stuff online. But I use a mix of kind of what Dan Kennedy does and Ben Settle. It's kind of, and then my flair added to it. And I take that client avatar and I upload it into ChatGPT. So I tell ChatGPT, I'm going to upload my ideal client avatar. If you understand, say I understand. And so I upload it. Okay. And then with that, I will tell it, ChatGPT, tell me, based on the information I provided to you, what are some potential emotions this person is feeling with this certain problem? And it will go based on what I've told it, and it's gonna spit out all these different angles that I can approach with my copywriting that are emotional hot buttons that I can trigger in my writing. Mm-hmm. And one of the practices I even love is I wanna focus on a specific one. If I'm writing to business owners, I will say, this business owner, my ideal avatar, is feeling anxious at night because they feel overwhelmed and they feel stressed because they don't have enough hours in their day. Mm-hmm. I want to coach those individuals. Write me a journal entry as the perspective of so-and-so that touches upon how they're feeling with all the stress and anxiety in their life. Have at it. And so then ChatGPT will write you a journal entry as the avatar, and it opens your eyes and kind of gives you these additional ideas as to additional hooks that you can use in your marketing to be able to better speak to that audience.
That's pretty darn cool. That is very, very cool. So we're going to wrap things up now. And we do have our copywriting training coming up very soon. So if anybody is interested in diving deep with Galel and I and learning how to write copy to make more money in your business very effortlessly, quickly, with all the bells and whistles and that will really get people's attention, then just try type copy in the word down below and we'll send you all the details. But what are the words of wisdom that you want to leave with somebody who's like really excited about this? Where should they go and get started? And how much time should they spend studying versus practicing? And what's the best way for them to figure out what works for their audience?
If you're excited about this and you want to get better at it, you're only going to get better if you actually practice, right? It's like the person who wants to get in shape, but they just sit around watching YouTube videos on fitness or watching Ronnie Coleman over and over again. Like, that's great to get you pumped up, but it's not going to actually put muscles on your body. Same thing, if you want to get good at copywriting, you have to put it into practice. So you have to write every day. Even if it's practicing in your text messages that you send to your spouse or emails that you're sending to your customers or your social media posts, you've got to practice every single day and find somebody else that's like a workout buddy with you. Is there a mentor, somebody who's maybe better at this than you are that you can bounce things off of? Or is there somebody in your sphere that's maybe part of your ideal avatar and you say, hey, would this compel you to this? You know, would this be helpful? Would you find this compelling? And keep working on your writing that way. So I would say if we're looking at 100%, 25% studies, 75% actually doing.
Absolutely amazing. All right, so that's going to wrap up today's show. We have a copywriting training. We are going to take our years of experience in actually studying and doing and selling and making money through copywriting and give you what's working right now so that you'll be able to grow your business. And if you want to be part of that training, just drop the word copy down below because Galel and I are going to show you an absolutely amazing system for getting more out of all the stuff that you're doing. And take that email list that you have and turn it into cash, all right? Because that's what you deserve. Anything else, sir?
Let's get ready to work.
All right. We'll see you very, very soon. This is Craig Ballantyne from Early to Rise Radio and can't wait to see you on the copywriting training.